So, my presentation today aims to examine some of the ways in which the documentation that artists contributed towards the pages of exhibition catalogues in the early conceptual era extended the view of artworks beyond the physical phenomenon of exhibitions. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, catalogues took on an increasingly central role in relation to exhibitions. On occasions, such as the calendar exhibition 1 month, March 1969, which we saw in Joe's presentation, and July, August, September 1969, both organised by Suffolk, publications came to replace the display of objects in a gallery altogether. Instead, the only place that all works by participating artists could be viewed simultaneously was through the pages of a catalogue. Documentation, including essays, texts, statements, proposals, drawings, maps and photographs, was supplied directly by artists, with the view that this afforded a more immediate or primary encounter with ideas and artworks, one that bypassed the interpretation of organisers and critics and invited audiences to play an active role in configuring meaning. Advancements in communication technology and the increasing ease of air travel helped artists, organisers and critics to form supportive international networks and present works in a range of venues. Often these venues were located outside of main cities and established art institutions, with exhibitions being hosted in smaller dealer galleries, local art centres and university libraries and grounds. So, for example, the exhibition at the moment was held in the entrance hall to a private apartment building in Zagreb between 5 and 8 p.m. on the 23rd of April 1971, which is imaged on the right of the screen here. Little documentation of this 3-hour exhibition has been published, apart from a poster advertising the event and a series of photographs included in the catalogue for a subsequent exhibition in Another Moment, which was in October 1971. These photographs on the right here show the entrance of the apartment building where that exhibition was held on the day before, the day of, and the day after the exhibition, with the surge of people entering the building in the central photograph, helping to express the fleeting nature of the show. The succeeding exhibition in Another Moment only lasted for a duration of 3 sets of 5 days, between which works were rearranged into new configurations. In the context of exhibitions such as July, August, September, At the Moment and In Another Moment, where works were visible for only a matter of hours, although surrendered to the effects of time and change, how artists represented their work upon the pages of exhibition catalogues became a significant element in determining the way in which their participation became known and remembered by the public after the close of the exhibition. Within this presentation, I'd like to explore how works of a temporary or remote nature, often located outside of the gallery, were brought into the hands of audiences. Speaking in 1969 at a symposium before the opening of Earth Art, organiser Willoughby Sharp cautioned of the works, quote, "Some of them are very far away, and you probably wouldn't want to go there because it would require maybe, well, a 40-minute walk through the woods and back," end quote. Sharp may have been referring to Jan Dibbett's piece, A Trace in the Wood from the Angle of 30 Degrees Crossing the Path, which is pictured on the left here, for which the artist considered the walk to the site as part of the work. Works like this would remain largely unseen by the public and only known through photographs and descriptions in the catalogue, which in this instance was not published until the following year. For viewers wishing to experience such works firsthand, a concerted effort was necessary to be in the right place at the right time, but the likelihood is that most audiences came to know about them through catalogues. Photographs were considered one of the most direct and accessible forms of documentation available to conceptual artists. For artists whose work were located in remote environments or comprised a journey or experience, photographs offered an immediate snapshot of a precise moment in time and space that may be impossible for audiences to directly experience. These also offered perspectives that might not be possible even if the site of an artwork was accessible, serving to capture a view exactly as the artist intended it to be seen. However, not all artists believe that photographs should come to substitute the experience of viewing a work. When asked about the relationship between photograph and sculpture, Carl Andre described the photograph as a lie. He added, quote, "I'm afraid we get a great deal of exposure to art through magazines and through slides, and I think this is dreadful. This is anti-art, because art is a direct experience with something in the world, and photography is just a rumour, a kind of pornography of art," end quote. So Andre's statement was included in the first issue of Avalanche magazine, which is pictured here. This was dedicated to land art, and it was a richly illustrated publication in which several pages were given over to glossy full-bleed photographs of artists and their work. Andre's comments sit uneasily in this context and serve to illustrate the contested status of photography as documentation, information, and art form. The candid and factual appearance of photography used in the conceptual era disguises the way in which this medium guided and on occasions altered viewers' perception of artworks in print reproduction. So moving on to one of the examples I'd like to show you today, I'm just going to take a moment to look at Robert Smithson, who in 1968 made the distinction between a site and a non-site within his practice. For Smithson, a site in an outside environment had hazy boundaries, which he described by saying, quote, "There's nothing to grasp onto except the cinders, and there's no way of focusing on one particular place," end quote. Without any real edges, the distinction between the work and the environment it is situated in is fluid. However, the documentation brought into the exhibition, and I would argue by extension the catalogue, was identified as a non-site with clear edges. For Smithson, site and non-site constitute a collection of relationships among variables. He said, "The site is identified by information supplied by the artist in the form of maps, photographs, analogical objects such as bins and trays cued by the original lay of the land, rock samples and verbal captions. The non-site, by accumulation of references, acts as a signifier of the absent site," end quote. Of all his catalogue contributions, Smithson's pages in Artists and Photographs 1970 calls into question the edges of sites and non-sites most astutely. Artists and Photographs comprised a gallery presentation at Multiples Gallery in New York, and a limited edition collection of books and multiples contained in a large box. Organiser Lawrence Alloway referred to Artists and Photographs as an exhibition/catalogue, indicating that the artist's contributions across the two formats were variants of the same work rather than reproductions. He added, both the object and the catalogue entry are permutations made possible by the repeatability of the photographic process. So this is Smithson's contribution to that catalogue. It comprised a colour photograph which was taken at close range, showing discarded materials such as rubble, bricks, soil and stones, and it was captured on the reverse as torn photograph from the second stop, brackets rubble. Second mountain of 6 stops on section. In discussing the relationship between earthworks and photography, Allaway concluded that when so much of the work was inaccessible due to its location or use of ephemeral materials, quote, the documentary photograph is grounds for believing that something happened, end quote. But quite what that something is in regards to Smithson's project remains elusive. Whilst the viewer can ascertain that Smithson took a trip to a designated site, neither the photograph or the caption are focused enough to assist the viewer in ascertaining the site visited. The scope of the photograph, which is dictated by the aims of the lens, therefore provides a further example of a non-site. Smithson began taking trips to specific sites, particularly around New Jersey in 1965. He explained how certain sites would appeal to me more, sites that had in some way been disrupted or pulverised. I was really looking for a denaturalisation rather than a build-up of scenic beauty. Consequently, the photograph included in Artists and Photographs depicts one such site where machines munch steadily away at a quarry. Allaway accompanied Smithson on several trips, and he wrote the only feature-length article on Smithson that would be published in his lifetime, in which he observed how the artist was attending to a landscape, not only in terms of natural processes, but in terms of human interventions as well, causing the artist to develop a concern of fragmentation, corrosion, decomposition, disintegration, rock creep, debris slides, mud flow and avalanche. Smithson's fascination with fragmentation extended beyond the content of the photograph to the form of the image itself. According to the caption on the reverse of Smithson's work, the original photograph measured 55 by 55 centimetres. What the viewer encountered in the box was this photograph torn into 4 roughly even-sized square pieces. The photograph has been torn by hand, firstly as one continuous vertical tear, followed by a horizontal tear to the 2 halves. Upon first encountering the torn photograph, it may take viewers a little while to configure the full image, a process that is rendered more difficult due to the similarity of the pieces of rubble and stone depicted, for the image appearing to have no definitive top or bottom. Viewers are invited to shuffle through the 4 fragments of the photograph, changing the orientation of these to encounter different views and relationships between the pieces of rubble, before arriving at the intended arrangement. This invites a haptic and even performative engagement with the work, evocative of how Smithson may have encountered the original site where the photograph was taken, overturning rocks and rubble, as well as later tearing the image itself. The photograph is an example of a non-site as it is portable. The torn element enforces this. It extends the location in which the photograph was taken into another time and place, thus blurring these boundaries even more. The piece that we've just seen, which was Smithson's contribution to Artists and Photographs, is atypical of most photographs of land art that were in circulation in the late 1960s and 70s. Many outdoor works were large scale and inseparable from their surrounding landscape, thus requiring photographs to be taken from a long-range perspective. Furthermore, the only way to view the full extent of larger works, such as Rift 1, 1968 by Michael Heiser, and Spiral Jetty by Smithson, which are both pictured here, was from the air, or for most viewers via reproductions of photographs, benefiting from this bird's eye perspective. To take photographs of his outdoor works, British artist Richard Long more modestly took to higher ground to capture the full extent of his interventions into the landscape. To photograph England 1967, the artist makes a short walk across to another vantage point, resulting in a photograph that is closer to how we might approach it ourselves. In 1967, while still a student at St Martin's School of Art, London, Richard Long and 7 other young and relatively unknown artists were invited to create artworks with an impermanent character that could not be traded or owned. As part of the exhibition 1945 to 2155, September 9th, 1967, Frankfurt, Germany. Fellow artist Jan Dibbits covered the paving of a courtyard outside the gallery with sawdust, leaving an oval in the centre in which the cobblestones beneath remained visible. Throughout the duration of the opening, the sawdust became dispersed with people's footsteps, diffusing the distinction between the two surfaces. And so this would be a photograph taken at the beginning of that process, which is included in the catalogue. As the title of the catalogue indicates, the exhibition held at Gallery Dorothea Lohr in Frankfurt only lasted for the duration of 2 hours and 10 minutes. The exhibition is remembered through scant documentary photographs and a thin catalogue that was produced approximately 1 month later in a numbered edition of 500 copies. It appears from the catalogue that Long was not present to install his work in the gallery. Instead, he wrote to the organisers with an outline of his work, stating, "My idea is to lay these pieces of wood end to end in a straight line on the floor around the perimeter of the gallery, 15 centimetres in from each wall and parallel with it." And that is expressed in the letter on the left-hand side of the screen there. So this letter was sent with a bundle of wood and transfers responsibility for situating and arranging the work, along with gathering additional material if necessary. Of his participation, Long explained, "I am making a complementary object in Bristol with similar components and the same dimensions, but in an outdoor environment, without architecture, people, or other objects. I will send you the photographs for your documentation." So following the publication of this letter, we find 2 photographs showing in it both the indoor and the outdoor setting. The first image is of the gallery installation, and it shows only a portion of the completed sculpture. It appears to focus on an architectural feature of the room that disrupts the otherwise uniform layout of the work. Although not visible from this photograph, Long states that there should be a gap for the doorway, presumably to allow people to enter the space, as well as around any intervening objects. It is not possible for the reader to ascertain the full scale of the completed sculpture from this image alone, nor the proportion of the work photographed. Due to the physical constraints of the gallery architecture, the person taking the photograph has either needed to stand inside the work to document it, or along the very edge of it, which in turn limits the reader's view of it. So consequently, the full content of these first 2 pages by Long were concealed, thus restricting the audience's view of the work which this photograph captures. The experience of encountering these pages arguably replicated the limited perspective that one might have of Long's work in the fabricated, man-made environment. Long's final page in the catalogue, however, is fully accessible. This presents a photograph of the work constructed on a gentle slope, possibly the same parkland just outside Bristol that we saw a few slides ago as his earlier work, England 1967. Unlike the previous photograph included in the catalogue, this image has been taken from a distance perspective, clearly outside of the sculpture, helping to situate the work within the wider landscape. In this final image, equal space is given to the sculpture and the environment that it is located within, with the slope hinting at the boundless horizon and curvature of the earth, helping to convey a sense of spaciousness that is absent from the more closely photographed sticks arranged around the perimeter of the gallery. The way in which the image is cropped on the page replicates the limitations imposed by the architecture of the gallery for the first image. This prevents viewers from walking around and exploring the sculpture from alternative perspectives, which they are free to do in this open landscape. So, while Smithson and Long both on occasions would bring objects from the outdoor environment into the gallery space and arrange stones, sticks, soil, slate and rubble to evoke their experience of traversing the landscape, Hamish Fulton made his journeys known in exhibitions and catalogues solely through the use of candid photographs and factual information. Fulton, like Long and a small number of other conceptual artists working in the 1960s and 1970s, including Stanley Brown and Onkawara, withheld biographic information and explanatory text from exhibitions and catalogue pages, which serves to focus the viewer's attention on the precise details contained within the works themselves. Fulton's photographs from his journey, explained Rudy Fuchs, were potentially neutral, even uninteresting. Instead, Fuchs encouraged viewers to accept the sculptural and spatial quality of measurement that were felt in Fulton's photographs as something on its own, thus advocating the experience of walking and moreover viewing a landscape from the vistas presented. A selection of Fulton's journeys is presented as photographs and texts across 5 pages of the De Europa 1972 catalogue. Organised by dealers Conrad Fischer and Gian Enzo Speroni in collaboration with John Weber Gallery, De Europa gave European artists exposure in New York. 2 of the works included A Bicycle Journey from Canterbury, England to Delamont, Switzerland, 1971, and Hoad Lane, 1971, have been reproduced in several exhibition catalogues from this period. On each occasion, the precise wording and format are altered slightly, sometimes in keeping with the overall appearance of the catalogue they are presented in. A Bicycle Journey, which is this text here, gives the description of the route that Fulton followed from Canterbury to Delamont, Switzerland, by bicycle, then hitchhiking to Obel Elb Pass, which is a mountain pass in the Swiss Alps, followed by the walk to the top of Pixmala. Fulton describes the conditions as being a bright, clear day in July 1970. He repeats the walk almost a year later through rain and thunderstorm, this time unable to reach the summit, prompting consideration of, although how landscapes remain the same, external factors such as the weather alter our experience and navigation of them. Hoad Lane comprises a photograph of a narrow sunken lane near Canterbury, paired with a description of a 7-mile non-stop run, presumably along this lane, repeated over a 7-day period during December 1971. In addition to being included in the De Europa catalogue, Fulton also presented Hode Lane in the Documenta 5 and New Art catalogues, which were published only a few months apart. There are subtle differences between each version, including the wording of the description and the typeface and photograph used. The presentation of Hode Lane in Documenta 5 employs slightly different phrasing and an alternative photograph, possibly taken from another vantage point along the lane, evocative of how the experience of each subsequent visit to the same site would alter slightly. Like the previous work, A Bicycle Journey, it is presumed that Fulton returned to this site for 7 continuous days to undergo the run. It would of course also be possible for another person to follow these guidelines to make their own version of the work, or for Fulton to return to the site and remake the work as he did in the previous example described. These variations in presentation suggest that Fulton not only physically returned to the site to repeat the work over a time span of 1 week, but that he also revisited the piece after it was completed to refine its presentation. Fulton's final page in the De Europa catalogue is an uncaptioned photograph of an unusual old turnstile gate within an archway in a rural landscape. This is likely to be encountered on one of the artist's journeys. A lantern hangs in the archway of the gate, which appears to lead to an enclosed parkland with a pond or a lake straight ahead. It's not clear whether Fulton is approaching the gate or whether he has passed through it and looks back to photograph it. The gate is left ajar and rotates on its central axis every time it is pushed open. The worn gate might evoke the number of people who passed through it during its history. Viewers encountering Fulton's photographs within the pages of catalogues will be able to draw these images closer and observe the exactness of Fulton's views. In a review of his work at an exhibition at the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam, Barbara Rice wrote of her viewing experience. She said, "Getting into this work means getting your head out of this room and into that path, that place, that time, into Fulton's trip." End quote. The inclusion of place names and routes amongst Fulton's extremely sparing words and pictures makes it possible for the reader or viewer to embark on their own pilgrimage to the sites should they choose. Mountain peaks and passes change very little. Ancient roads such as Hode Lane endure, and the turnstile gate, although with the appearance of another time, continues to turn on its axis. These sites will all demonstrate signs of weathering from the elements and the people who pass through them, but even so, a viewer today could still piece together a journey based on Fulton's descriptions with reasonable accuracy. I would like to finish my presentation on this uncaptioned photograph by Fulton and use it to ask whether we are glancing back or looking forward when we encounter artist documentation within exhibition catalogues. For the works discussed in this presentation, and many others produced in the early conceptual era that were idea-based, site-specific, constructed from ephemeral materials, or experienced for a limited time period, documentation in catalogues, magazines and books remains the only tangible record of these works. 50 years after these works were initially conceived, it is tempting to suggest that the photographs and information become historic documents of absent work or experiences that we did not or could not have. The sense of time elapsed between when a work was created and the moment that we are looking at it now is heightened by the style of the images presented. the format of the catalogues encountered, and the yellowing and scent of their pages, as well as by their place within collections and archives. But I would like to propose that the page becomes a resting place or a pause along a larger journey, one that has a past, present and future tense. Referring to Fulton's photographs, Barbara Rice explained that getting into this work also means looking and thinking right here and now in very precise ways, thus calling on viewers to consider their own current situation as they view the photograph. The artworks examined here have no single view, and the format of their presentation as torn, cropped, concealed or altered images enhances this. As shown, Smithson's contribution to artists and photographs presents two equal variants, one in the gallery, one in the box, both translating the qualities of a non-site and evoking the artist's fascination with construction, destruction and fragmentation. Long sculpture was installed across two geographically distinct locations. It could be approached from different perspectives, and through the reproduction of images in the catalogue, readers are given an insight into the scope and limitations of these views. By providing concise descriptions of his journeys, Fulton equips himself and his readers or viewers with all the coordinates to retrace his work in another time. However, as shown in A Bicycle Journey, the experience of these works continues to differ due to the changeable external conditions, such as the seasons and the weather, ultimately leading to wholly different experiences. As a mass-produced and repeatable format, the printed image will continue to be visited multiple times over. As André asserted, photographs cannot fully capture the artist's experience at the time of making the work, nor the experience of viewing this for oneself. But the way in which images are presented on the page can serve to create a new experience, one that is equally unique to the moment in which we come to encounter it. Thank you.
Questions? We've got a few minutes if anyone would like to ask Matt a question. Judy, would you wait for the microphone, please?
Just one observation about the whole lane image where you said maybe it's taken from a different position in the lane, and I think that they're actually, it's flipped.
I wondered that, yes.
And yes, they're different images, and they're obviously in two major publications, so it was obviously intended. But I thought that was rather interesting.
And perhaps evocative of the looking down the lane at the beginning of the run and the looking back of it through the flipping of that image as well. Yes, that's a good point. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Well, I'm not sure
Could you wait for the microphone, please?
Yeah, they're different images. They're just, one's from about 100 metres down the road the other way, looking back. So it's not the same image. There's two different images. So it's not flipped. It's looking back.
We're going to have an interesting discussion now between all the photographers in the audience about whether these images are flipped or not.
It is flipped.
And it's cropped slightly differently as well.
Yeah, we'll be coming back to this in a, there'll be a prize for the person who gets this right.
it's halfway between Hugo and Judy. I think they're two different photographs, but pointing in the same direction. And one of the views is flipped. So it's halfway in between.
I think it's just confirming what we've been saying about the rather slippery nature of documentation. Any other questions or observations? Linda?
Sam, what's your conception of these early photographs together with the photographs that one was looking at, say, in the film just now? What is the difference between them?
Thank you, Linda. Difficult question. It's difficult to say without reflecting on one's own perspective to the images. For me, these images of the conceptual artworks are the only way through which I can come to access them 50 years after the works were made. And for a time I did debate whether the images became the artworks in absence of those artworks not being there anymore, and that's something that I debated quite a lot, but I think comes down to the individual artist in most cases. Whereas I don't have the same level of perspective with the images that we've been seeing from more recent photographs today, and I think they don't feel as historic, they don't feel like the historic documents which we have from the 60s and 70s as much. I think that's still in debate, really, what they are. It's possibly a bit too recent. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it, but it's interesting.
So first Lewis, and then I think Edward's got a question after that.
Or Edward should ask a question.
There's no sound. Yeah, take the other microphone.
We can't hear you, Edward, just grab the other mic, thanks.
What leads you this and this?
I believe Edward's asking what would happen if one were to flip one photograph and superimpose it atop the other, whether they would match up exactly.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, there's another little project for me. That's good. I will be studying these images very closely when I get home.
I don't know if this is particularly relevant to the discussions in hand, but I'm just looking at the images of the Smithsonian, all the kind of epic land art pieces. I'm just interested in sort of the difference that drone technology and drone cultures made to our experience of land art, and particularly in relation to the artist's intention about how we view the work.
That's a really timely question, and yes, when I was looking at this work initially and these aerial views of it, it was around the time of the Whole Earth catalogue being published, and those aerial views of Earth that hadn't widely been seen by people, but were suddenly published in a mass-produced